So when I was growing up, we have a number of lakes around where I was raised as a child and then up through my young adult years. And there were always these stories about these giant fish that lived at the bottom of these lakes. One lake in particular near our house got really deep, like 120, 130 feet deep. And there was stories about how at the base of the dam there was these catfish the size of Volkswagens and things like that. I don't really know if they're true, but whenever I read the account of Jonah, I inevitably go back to the stories of these giant catfish. So we've kind of gotten to the introduction of Jonah. We kind of got through the first verses, and then we have this what I would call a bury the lead moment. When in verse 17 it says, "Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights." And that's it. That's the explanation. Hey, Jonah was thrown overboard, the storm stopped, and oh yeah, he got swallowed by a fish. This is kind of a big deal. It almost feels like you're burying the lead here. And so people ask the question, well, Jeremy, do you believe that Jonah actually got swallowed by a whale? Well, I don't know if it was a whale, but I do believe that Jonah got swallowed by a big fish. Why? Well, because again, Jesus looked at it and he talked about Jonah as if this was an actual account and not something of mythical, fictional proportions. And also, honestly, I try to read the Bible with a mindset of a literal interpretation followed by then any kind of any other mythology type symbology type readings. So when we look at Jonah, we don't see anything that would lead us to believe that this is anything other than a literal story. We don't see any symbols anywhere. We don't see anything along those lines that would lead us to believe that this is a symbolic story. So we can take this as an actual historic story, especially when we know that Nineveh, the city that's brought up into this, is a real life city. And it actually ends up with real life consequences. So here we are. He's been swallowed by the big fish. And while he's inside the big fish, he's got some time to think and smell. And from inside the fish, in chapter 2, verse 1, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. This is interesting. I like that. His God. Remember how Jonah at the beginning was running away from God and trying to run out from the presence of the Lord? Well, he discovered that a ship to Tarshish was not going to solve it. A storm, being thrown in a storm, was not going to solve that whole escaping the presence. And even inside of a big fish, Jonah has come to a place where he recognized, I guess I can't escape God after all. And he says, "In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me." God, you hear what I'm saying. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me, and I said, I've been banished from your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me, the deep surrounded me, seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the root of the mountains I sank down, the earth beneath barred in me forever. But you, Lord, my God, brought my life up from the pit. So Jonah has been in the storm and he's been in these pits of despair. And yet Jonah is praising God because God saved his life by having him being eaten by this fish, by being swallowed whole. And when my life was ebbing away, suddenly, verse 7, I remembered you, Lord. My prayers rose to you, to your holy temple. To those who cling to worthless idols, turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say salvation comes from the Lord. So here we have Jonah having an apparent change of heart and saying, you know what, God? I am going to now proclaim you as you commanded me to. And God sees this and recognizes that Jonah is willing to obey. And so in verse 10, the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. What an interesting and unique prayer we see. See, if I was in the belly of a fish, I don't know that my prayer would be that you rescued me. I don't know that my prayer would be that, God, you brought me from the depths. But Jonah's prayer was, God, I was drowning and you saved me. And so now, God, I have the privilege of serving you yet again. You have given me a second life. That's a pretty amazing prayer. But it does make you wonder, though, did Jonah really mean it? We'll talk about that tomorrow.